And I don't know if that came across clearly in the presentation. One of the key questions today, I think that to some extent it's idiosyncratic, but it's not, and especially hearing you talk about difference as so central to what you do is very telling for me, because that's also what I think is the most interesting project theoretically and politically for anthropology and cultural studies and geography and other fields as well, which is how do we develop new ways for thinking about what is the status of difference today, and how do we develop new ways for thinking about difference, but also how we bring that sort of politics of difference into our own ways of thinking and teaching, and opening up the classroom and opening up theory to other ways of thinking about knowledge and other ways of thinking about life and so forth. So for me, that question about difference is so central to what I do, and I think it's what is being articulated from some South American spaces by a number of social actors, not only indigenous peoples, but all kinds of different social actors.
For me, it's a material reality of the classroom. I mean, that's differences is where I have to start, because I'm an English-speaking, non-Chinese person speaking in a classroom which sometimes is 100% Cantonese-speaking Chinese students whose English is actually better than they feel it to be, but nevertheless fragile. And then on top of that, it's an undergraduate program in a university that doesn't have a lot of status.
I never see difference except in relation to sameness, and I always treat it as almost a universal given that people are always torn between the desire for difference and the desire for sameness. And when they are treating you, sometimes they can be nice to you by treating you as the same, and sometimes they're treating you nice by treating you as different, and sometimes they're nasty by treating you the same, or nasty by treating you as different. We, as human beings, also don't know really what we want. We're real pain. If people address us at a party and emphasize our difference, we can get hurt and say, why aren't they treating me as if I'm one of them? And if they come and treat me as one of them, I say, hey, why can't you see me in my difference? And so this sort of like ambivalence between sameness and difference, I take it for granted as I approach the classroom. And very often I think about what does it mean to project yourself to the place that you are addressing. And that's crucial, because for me in the classroom the main self-other is teacher, student, it's not cultural. And so it is an exercise for me first, in an exercise in saying, can I speak to the other and project myself in the space of the other, which is part of what it means to communicate properly. That is, I'm speaking to you, but I have to somehow not speak to myself. I have to speak to you. I have to imagine that I'm you, in order to assume that somehow my effort is going to be worthwhile and that you can understand. And I think this is crucial when I talk to the students, that say, I'm always connected, not to where I'm speaking, the position I'm speaking, but the position of the other, which is the position of the receiver. And that's why I think it pays off. Objectively, I think my students always appreciate how much I'm tuned in. And this is, by the way, why I think video conferencing, etc., can never replace real lecturing.
To continue with this sameness difference variation, of course, this extends beyond differences among humans to differences between humans and non-humans, say animals, or even things. So that you have this possibility of recognition of sameness, like when you make your pet, you want to make it feel as if it's almost human, and you treat it as if it's a member of the family, and you make it almost almost the same, but not. In other instances, an animal can be so radically other that you can't see any sameness at all. But for my problem of thinking through ecological things, which I think cultural studies has got a lot to offer to, then it's the non-human world should be seen as an interlocutor in similar sorts of dialogues. It's almost as if an object can have a kind of morality.
We are different, and that refers me back to the question of what does it mean to be, not even to be an academic, because I don't see myself only as an academic, but what does it mean to work primarily within an academic context today in a globalized world, and the question of the canon, and the question of what do we read, how do we write, from Australia, from the US, a Lebanese working in Australia, an Australian teaching in Hong Kong, a Latin American teaching in the US, a Cameroonian, I'm from Cameroon, Cameroonian teaching in Ottawa of Canada. So what do we have in common because of the experience of being academics within a relatively homogenized and hegemonized modern social science / humanities tradition? And how do we confront that, and how do we, in a way, challenge and open up the canons to other ways of thinking, to other intellectual political practices, to welcoming the students' own intellectual and political projects in a way that are not so disciplined along the way. And I had an experience very recently, I used to tell this in Argentina, teaching in Buenos Aires, and it was a graduate seminar on development and modernity. And we started with some texts by Latin Americans, but could be very well related to Deleuze and Guattari in particular, to new thinking about autonomy and about non-state forms of power, other kinds of logics. And from the beginning I was trying to situate those kinds of work within genealogies of modern thinking, but also making visible that this is a particular genealogy of modern thinking. And the students just took off on their own. It was so interesting. They sort of took control of the seminar. And they ended up not even being interested in those genealogies and those things. And for me, it was interesting. It was a revelation. But at the same time, I wanted them to know, well, when you're talking about this concept, that comes from this tradition of thinking. So my question is, to what extent is that still useful to do? To introduce students, graduate students, let's say, from different parts of the world into locating themselves within traditions and lineages of thinking, even as a way of seeing those traditions and then stepping out of those traditions.